Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Mawlana Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa azwajihi wa zurriyyatihi ajma'in. So the third term which is important for understanding the sophist method is Antilogike. Antilogike is the third genre. Antilogike oppose arguments is one with deep roots in Greek culture. Antilogism, in logic, antilogism this just a dictionary definition is inconsistent triad of propositions. So in logic, of which two are premises of a valid syllogism, but the third conclusion, that is the contradictory of its conclusion, so actual conclusion which should have been there. Okay, so this is just a definition. And antilogism, from Greek anti, logisms just mean calculation, reasoning, and anti just mean the opposed, so opposed to the reasoning, or the opposite reasoning. Okay, let's go back to the antithetical arguments can be found in Iliad and in Greek tragedy. They were of course standard in the assembly and law courts and are satirized by Aristophanes, most notably in his Clouds, where he makes fun of Socrates as well, if you remember. In the combat of just and unjust speech. I think I missed this one. Let's go back to, so I don't know where did I stop, but no harm in repeating some of the stuff. So antithetical arguments can be found in Iliad and in Greek tragedy. They were of course standard in the assembly and law courts, because obviously assembly and law courts, even if there weren't any professional lawyers, those who did write speeches for the people arguing their cases in court, you probably might have to write for both parties at times, or so you are arguing for one person that is, for example, guilty, and for the other person in the same case that is not guilty. So basically you're using logic, but without any consideration for the truth, and that's the point here. And are satirized by Aristophanes, most notably in his Clouds. It's the same play in which he makes fun of Socrates in the combat of the just and the unjust speech. As a sophistic speciality, Antilogike is particularly associated with Protagoras, who is said to have written a treatise or a book on Antilogike, and to have been the first to claim that on every question there are two arguments opposed to each other, meaning that one argument, for example, proving something, and the same argument, or the second argument, disproving the same thing. The dissoi, logoi, double arguments, the same thing as what we just said. Antilogism puts into practice this Protagorean principle. So do the tetralogies of Antiphon, which argue both sides of three hypothetical legal cases. As with the rest, much remains to be understood about how Antilogike is supposed to function, in particular whether it should be seen as a purely gymnastic exercise, meaning that an exercise to hone your reasoning skill, or something more, or whether it depends on particular views about the nature of the truth. And that's where comparison between the sophists and Socrates become important, in the sense that nobody would object really if we are using arguments. So I'm arguing for one case A, and I'm arguing for the same case, not the case that A. So if I'm doing just this for mental exercise to hone my logical skill, then obviously nobody is going to object to that. But the question is whether probably the Socratic complaint against sophistic method of Antilogike was that they are technicians, logical technicians, in the sense that they argue for one case and then they will, feel no qualms in arguing it is not the case A in the same vein or in the same settings for the same object. So first they are arguing A, and then they are arguing it's not the case A. So what it means is, according to Socrates, is that they don't have any regard for the truth, because A and not the case A can't be both true, because if this is true, this must be false, and if this is false, this must be true, etc. So I think that's the basic Socratic objections against sophists. If we accept that that was their method indeed, that they disregarded truth, for example. So, as with Aristic, much remains to be understood about the Antilogike is supposed to function, in particular whether it should be seen as purely a gymnastic exercise or something more, and whether it depends on particular views about the nature of truth, whether truth is something objective or is relative to a person or his or her perspective, as Protagoras seemed to have believed. A further question is whether we should view Antilogike as a genre in itself, or as something which might take a number of forms. eristic refutation performed on both sides of a question would presumably count as antilogike. So if you refute one from this side and then go on the other side and refute this side, so perhaps should epidexies such as Gorgias, Helen, and on not being defenses of the patently indefensible, for which the obvious other side of the case cannot be left unspoken. These different sophistic practices have some common features. All are verbal in nature, so they are arguments, and involve prose rather than verse. Most obviously eristics seem to have been originally and primarily oral rather than written genres. All are explicitly or implicitly agonistic or competitive, like involve arguments between two sides. And scholars such as Burkhardt and Nietzsche have noted the pervasively agonistic, agon mean for, style of ancient Greek culture. And the Sophists belonged to a world in which intellectuals, poets, and politicians were as much competitive public performers as the Olympic athletes. Finally, and in part as a result of this agonistic stance, the characteristics of the genre all have an uneasy relation to truth and belief, because if you are treating argument as combat, then obviously the main purpose is to win over your opponent and not truth as such. Antilogike and eristic are both indifferent to the content of the thesis under discussion. So the main thing is you argue for something successfully, irrespective of what that thing is. Long speeches can express conviction, of course, but the recognition of Markologia as a mode of competitive display should warn us against any assumption that sophisticated speech will do so. This is one of the reasons it will be easier to extract themes and arguments from dogmata from sophistic texts, and arguments than dogmata from sophistic texts, because they are basically competitive display, and the belief we can't necessarily know what they actually believed in that sense, because they would do anything and they would argue for anything. Anything was to show their oratory, show their skills, and show that they can win, etc. So, and apparently Socrates didn't like that, obviously, because he thought that truth is something beyond all this. Okay, we'll stop here.